Thank you all for being here. It's good to see a lot of you. Good to see some visitors. I've realized that the past couple of, this week and this weekend, we've been eating a lot. We've been eating some heavy stuff. So today I plan to go something we've studied about before. I think something easy to understand, but certainly something we can apply and need to be reminded of. And that's going to be about respecting the elderly and respecting the older. I'm going to do my best, and I've been warned not to use the phrase old people throughout this entire sermon. And I'm not going to try to do that at all. I think Zacharias has a nice little line when he's talking to Gabriel about Elizabeth, and he says, "How can this be?" He says, "I am old, and my wife is advanced," right? And he's got some clever language that I'm going to try to adopt. But very important topic, and something that, Lord willing, we all experience. We all get older, and we all become the aged eventually, Lord willing. And, of course, the church is made up of people of multiple generations. And our societies are made up of people of multiple generations. And how are we supposed to treat each other? I think that's something very important we need to talk about. I've been working on this sermon a while in my mind. And maybe I shouldn't be giving out medical information online, but I'm allergic to everything. Like, I found that out last year, where I used to have sinus infections all the time, and they do an allergy test on me at the doctor, and they're like, "You are allergic to everything." And so they recommended that I take allergy shots. So once a week, I go and get an allergy shot at the ENT. And as you can imagine, I'm having to go for a very long time because, like I said, I'm allergic to everything. And I've been going there for almost over a year now to just go in there and get this shot, and I have to wait 20 minutes to make sure I don't have some bad reaction to it. And what are the type of people that go to an ENT that I'm seeing every week? It's mostly older people that are struggling with their ears, right? And so once a week, I sit in a room with several older people that are having hearing loss problems, and they're there trying to get some help, obviously. So every day I'm there, hilarity ensues. It's crazy in that waiting room. Nobody can hear. Everybody's deaf. And then, you think about it, they're in there, and everyone's talking on the top of their lungs because they can't hear each other. People's phones are going off, and they can't hear their phones going off. So it's just ring, 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 ring. And if they do, they don't know how to work their phone to start it. The ENT's made a huge mistake that now they don't give you a piece of paper to fill out your medical information. They give you a tablet. And they're handing these people these tablets and saying, "Fill out your medical information." And every single one of them is just throwing that thing across the room. And maybe sometimes I offer to help, but most of the time I don't because I just enjoy to watch the chaos. I enjoy it. But I even think of this same thought. I actually get there a few minutes early every time because there's a very sweet lady that comes and gets her allergy shot with me at the same time. But this is the only thing she does that day. I'm confident she's retired. I'm confident she's probably living by herself. And when she goes to get the allergy shot before me, she talks to the nurse for 20 minutes about what's going on in her week. And I'm like trying to get back to work. So I've tried to get there a few minutes early, so I beat her, and I go ahead and get my shot, and she can talk to the nurse as long as she wants. And I try to talk to her back in the waiting room. And so there's some things like that I think the Bible teaches us about how to handle these kind of situations. And how to be respectful and loving to people that hopefully we will become one day. So we'll be looking at that. Let's be clear about what the world says. The world's trying to divide us, and our society is very much trying to push the older generation and the younger generation away from each other. And I think in our society, at least, not the church, they have succeeded in that, in dividing us both. Think about it, the world is trying to turn us against each other. It tells us that we're frustrated with each other, that we blame each other for the problems we have. We've all developed bad opinions of each other, and older people say bad things about young people, and young people say bad things about old people. It's not that you hear that, it's that you hear the news tell you that's what people are saying. We blame the other group for the problems that our society has. No one takes personal responsibility. No one says it's a mix of responsibility. Everyone just says, what's the other group? They're the reason why we live in this society, and of course it's never the group that you belong to. We formulate opinions of each other based off what the media tells us and not our real relationships with older and younger people, don't we? We get fed what we're supposed to believe about each other. And of course, what a worse organization than the media to tell us how we should have opinions of each other. The world, of course, has even overgeneralized us into just two labels. That we're no longer individuals, some individuals who are good for society and some individuals that are bad for society, but instead, what has the world just labeled us as? The world has just labeled us as boomers and millennials, right? Who in the world even comes up with these generation names? I wish they'd ask me. I could give them some better ones. But you even think for this just a second, you'll hear this on the news constantly, right? Boomers do this, millennials do this, boomers say this, millennials say this. And all it's done is just try to pull this wedge between us both and make us look like we're very different people when in reality, we're actually very similar. We're both human, and we both have the same problems that Jesus came to save us from. I'm not going to make fun of boomers because I'm not one of them, but I'll make fun of millennials since I am one of them. But that the news is constantly, and Facebook and our social media is littered with articles that are constantly slamming each other. This one says millennials are ditching bar soap in favor of liquid soap, and that's bad for the environment. Oh no, bar soap. Millennials are killing bar soap. Millennials are killing their bosses, What? That's not happening. No one's murdering anybody. But this is constant, just kind of like shame language that we throw on each other. Demotivated millennials are killing call center productivity. The thought is that all millennials are not motivated. They don't work. What about this one? I like it. Did millennials kill fashion? Is fashion dead? I hope so. But if I want to kill anything, I'll take credit for that. But even, just the crazy things, of course, just trying to basically just create negativity because these people don't have anything better to write about. Will the millennial generation kill Home Depot? Oh no, and it's talking about how millennials don't like to work hard. They don't home improvement stuff on the weekends. Therefore, Lowe's and Home Depot are suffering for it. My personal favorite I save for last. Millennials are killing the napkin industry. We don't buy napkins, and it's true. I don't buy napkins. We buy paper towels. Why do you need a napkin? Paper towel will do the job, right? But you think about it, why is all this stuff getting reported? Well, number one, it's because we click on it. It's our own fault. They're making ad revenue every time we click on this garbage. But on top of that, it's just further and further put a wedge between us both that doesn't need to exist. And we could do the same thing with boomers, couldn't we? There's articles there, boomers do this cause this problem. But again, it's the same purpose. It's just trying to split this wedge before us. Anyone that's the author of division, who's behind all that? The author of division is Satan. And he has obviously done a very good job, at least in our society, of splitting a wedge between us generationally, when actually the Lord has told us that we are much stronger together. So what we'll do is we'll look at society first, and in the end we'll look at the kingdom and how we're supposed to treat each other in the kingdom. So a very simple thing. I'll have most of my verses on the screen. We're going to read a lot. But we need to look at this and what the Bible commands about this. The Bible commands not for us to be divided, but the Bible commands for us to come together. Because God knows that we're stronger together, and He developed the world to work like this. That there would be an older generation to teach and guide the younger generation. And what happens? Eventually that younger generation becomes the older generation that teaches the next. God planned it like this. He didn't mean to drive a wedge between us. Proverbs 23:22. The Proverbs writer says, "Listen to your father who begot you, and do not despise your mother when she is old." And the thought here that I think Solomon's pointing out is that the world tries to get you to go the opposite direction, right? It tries you to get to a point where you stop listening to your father, and tries to get you to a point that you start despising your mother because she's old and she frustrates you, right? And it's just this little reminder, no, don't do that at all. Do the very opposite. Listen to your father because he bore you. And honor your mother even when she's old. And you're having to maybe take care of more of her than she's taking care of you. Because that's what she deserves, right? Proverbs 17:6 says, "Children's children are the crown of old men, and the glory of the children is their father." Obviously not talking about society, but the family unit, but you can see how there's a give and take here, right? These two things are intricately connected. A grandfather, right? His grandchildren is his crown. It's his glory, right? Now, what do the children say? The children's glory is their father. And you think about this for just a second, and I know that maybe it doesn't apply to all of us. Not all of us had good fathers and good grandfathers. I understand that. But for us that did, are you not proud that your grandfather is your grandfather? I think for a lot of us, maybe not all, we are proud of that, right? What is our grandfather most proud of? That we are his grandchildren, right? And it's because this is the way that God designed this to work. We are intricately connected with each other. We realize that we're a product of what our parent generation created. So we're proud of them. And they realize that they created us, so they're proud of us. And we can be each other's glory if we stay connected the way the Bible commands us to. Leviticus 19:32 is a good passage to talk about this. Leviticus 19 is a passage where God is telling them all these different things they need to do in their society, and he ends it all with, I am the Lord your God. And this is the passage where we go to, where we learn that they're supposed to take care of the poor and the traveling by not gleaning the corners of their field. God also tells them to take care of people that are blind and are deaf. He even says if you curse in front of a deaf person, knowing that they can't hear it, God says, I will condemn you for that. And I will take care of that, and I will avenge that deaf person. And so there's little things like that of how we're supposed to treat each other on the street in our society. And this is one of the last things he says in verse 32 of Leviticus 19. He says, you shall rise before the gray-headed and honor the presence of the old man and fear your God. I am the Lord. And right there, to paint God's society for the children of Israel, he expects them to rise up and honor gray-headed people. And what's the thought there that goes along with that? The thought right after that is, and you will fear your God, right? And what he is he's putting his authority to back this thought of respecting the elderly, right? And even think about this from a worldly perspective. What is one of the primary reasons why we should respect those that are gray-headed? Well, I think it's because if we're fortunate enough, we're going to be gray-headed one day too, right? Isn't that the most powerful reminder of all of this? When we go into the ENT and we spend time with all those older people, don't I realize that if I'm lucky, I'm going to be in the ENT one day for my ears getting worked on, right? I know I'm going to be one of those people one day. And so when I know that, I should respect them, knowing that one day in turn I will receive that respect. And it's because this is the cycle. This is the cycle of life that God created for us on this earth. And obviously he's very serious about it here in Leviticus 19:32. What else does the Bible command? Again, we're talking about society, not the kingdom yet. But the Bible commands for us to see each other as important and useful. It's not that like the young generation has to take care of the old generation, and it's not just like the old generation has to take care of the young generation. Actually, the Bible describes this as that we have to take care of each other. And we both have useful things that the other group doesn't have. Deuteronomy 32:7. This is the song of Moses there, and he tells them to go to their elders and their fathers and to hear the Exodus story because they were there and they could tell you. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you, your elders, and they will tell you. Experience is helpful and powerful. And good storytelling, storytelling of things that happened in the past and how those things were resolved, or even the mistakes that were made, are powerful and helpful tools to help us get us through life, right? And is that not what a lot of the Bible is? The Bible is revealing the stories of the past to help us live for the future. And of course, older people can give you their own experiences, and they can use a lot of guidance here for leading us in the way that we should go. Proverbs 20:29, another passage that has to do with this. It says, the glory of the young men is their strength, and the splendor of an old man is their gray head, right? So the young man, his splendor, what makes him worthy is that he's strong. But the older man, his splendor and his glory is that he has gray hairs. I don't think the hair is what's the focus here, or maybe some of us for the lack thereof, right? I think what's being said here is the wisdom. And I think we already can make that connection. The gray hair is the symbol of the wisdom here. That the young men, they can provide for the group with their strength. The old men can provide for the group with their wisdom, right? And I know we're only talking about society here, but let's talk about something we all know. What about the church? You know, when we do things together in our spiritual work, or even the times we have to upkeep the building and that sort of thing, does this group not rely on young men for their strength? You think about how many times some of y'all needed to move out of your house. Who did you call? Did you not call all these boys right here? And you made them come because you knew you could work them to death and not pay them? I mean, you know, we're dependent on young men, aren't we? They are very useful for the work that we do. But think about older men. Are they useful? Have you ever had a problem and you thought, before I make a decision, let me go talk to brother or sister so-and-so about this first? Because their wisdom is just as useful as the strength of young men, right? And guess what? When I go to brother or sister so-and-so for advice, I don't pay them either, do I? That wisdom's free. Because this is the way, again, that God has created our society to work in the best possible way. One more passage. Let's turn there this time. 1 Kings 12. If you grew up going to a Bible class, I'm sure that this was hammered in your head, this story. Solomon is dead. Rehoboam has become king. And Jeroboam and the other people have come to Rehoboam asking, will you make things easier for us? And many of us know what Rehoboam did when he sought for advice on what the people are going to do. They ask him, are you going to make our yoke lighter? Are things going to get better, Rehoboam? And in verse 5, he says, depart from me 3 days, come back to me. And the people departed. Now Rehoboam's going to figure out what he's going to tell the people. It says, verse 6, then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who stood before his father Solomon where he lived. And he said, how do you advise me to answer the people? And he spoke to them, saying, if you will be a servant to these people today, and serve them and answer them, and speak good words to them, then they will be your servants forever. But he rejected the advice of the elders had given him, and consulted the young men who had grown up with him, who stood before him. And he said to them, what advice do you give? How should we answer the people who have spoken to me, saying, lighten the yoke which your father put on us? And the young men who had grown up with him spoke to this son, saying, thus you speak to the people who have spoken to you, saying, your father made our yoke heavy, but you make it lighter for us. Thus you shall say to them, my little finger shall be thicker than my father's waist. Whereas my father put a heavy yoke on you, I will add to your yoke. My father chastened you with whips, but I will chasten you with scourges. So Jeroboam and all the people came back on the third day. And look at verse 13. The king answered the people roughly, rejected the advice the elders had given him, and spoken to him according to the advice of the young men. You that know have studied this story. What happens next? Rehoboam loses 10 out of the 12 tribes that were assigned to him. And they all leave and go north to go follow Jeroboam. He lost almost, the majority of his kingdom. And what was the reason? He went to the wrong people for advice. He would rather have listened to the young men and to his friends about what he should do than his father's advisors. And all because, probably, he liked the advice of the young men better. Does not Proverbs 20:29 speak to this, right? Who are you supposed to go to first for advice? Is it the young men who are strong, or is it the wise men who have gray hair? It's the wise men, right? Because this is their useful part of being the culture. And so let's remember this, and I remember this is something that we have drilled into us from a very young age, that Rehoboam's folly was he did not heed the advice of the older generation. And of course, we can make easy application to that. And remember that we're going to make a comparison to that in just a second, a kind of altar example. Let's talk now about the kingdom and the way that we're supposed to perceive each other in the kingdom. How should young people perceive the older people? Well, the younger cannot look at the older generation as a burden. And that's the picture that the world's painted. The older generation is a burden. They put us into debt. We have all these problems that they created. They're just a burden on society, right? But especially in the Lord's kingdom, this is not the case. And we cannot look to them or even perceive them in that light. This is how younger people are going to have to look at the older people as. Psalm 92 says this. So those who have planted in the house of the Lord shall flourish in the courts of our God. They shall still bear fruit in old age. They shall be fresh and flourishing. Those people who live in the house of the Lord, what do they do in their old age? They continue to bear good fruit, right? They are still working members of the kingdom. And when people are able to go to them and see that, they're fresh and they're flourishing, right? And you think about this. I had a young man talk to me about some of the older members at his congregation. And he said to me that his problem was that a lot of them, not all, but a lot of them were gossiping. That he knew that they were getting together and they were gossiping and they were talking about each other, and then they were getting back to him, and they were expecting him to fix it. And an older man gave this other man an advice about that. And I thought the advice was very good. You need to give those people a job. The reason why they're gossiping is because they're all retired. They don't have a day job. And you need to give them a job to get them busy to start bearing good fruit. Was that not the perfect advice for Christians? This is what we need to do. We need to get our older people as busy as possible, right? Because you think about those that have the income and the time and the resources to really do a lot of good visiting and a lot of good encouraging and even a lot of good teaching. Who are the people that have the time and the resources to do that? But our older people. And that fits with Psalm 92 perfectly, doesn't it? That even in old age in the kingdom house, you will still bear good fruit. And there are several of us here that are older that I know that you are doing great at visiting and working in God's kingdom. Because me and Jason go visit somebody in the hospital, and they say, oh, brother, sister, so-and-so just left, right? You beat us there. And I think that's exactly what God expects out of you. And you'll be able to use your resources and your position in life to really do a lot of good for God's kingdom. The younger need to recognize that it is the older people that are doing a lot of good work for this congregation, and the reason why our congregation is where it is right now. Also think about Psalm 71, 18, 19. The psalmist says this here, now also when I am old and gray-headed, O God, do not forsake me until I declare your strength to this generation, your power to everyone who has come. What a great attitude to have. To think that, you know what, Lord, I want to live just long enough so that I can declare your strength to this generation. You know, it's not saying like I want to live long enough because I want to go see the Grand Canyon. You know, Lord, I want to live long enough so I can go on this trip to Alaska. No, you say, Lord, I want to live long enough so I can declare your strength to this generation. What a great attitude to have, and a kingdom attitude to have. And the thing is, as the younger people, we need to recognize that the older people that have this attitude, look how useful that is. That they feel like their mission in life is to make sure that they leave the next generation knowing who God is. And what a powerful thing to respect. And to get a lot of our older people teaching. Teaching especially, not just out here to the adults, but to our young folks downstairs, right? To take those opportunities. And again, let's not think again, I said again too many times, now the third time. Let's not think that it's only our young people, 20s and 30s, that are down there teaching our kids. And they're the ones that only have the energy to wrestle those kids and get them in there and get them seated and listen to a story about Jesus. But that our older people are going to be some of the people that are best equipped to be in there and to hold those kids down and to teach them the story of Jesus. And I think that's what we do have going on. And what a great opportunity. I think I have some of my fondest memories of older ladies teaching me about the gospel. And they're the first ones that explained to me who Jesus was, who the apostles were, who the 12 tribes were. That was an important part of my foundation that I was given for free. It was a blessing. Psalm 71 speaks to that. One more passage about the way that we younger people need to perceive the older as being so useful and so detrimental to the work of the kingdom is thinking about our origin story. When I'm talking about Christianity, what is our origin story? Who is our father and mother who fathered and mothered us all in faith? Our origin story goes back to Abraham and Sarah, right? And guess what? Abraham and Sarah were advanced when their story begins. Genesis 21:2, for Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God has spoken to him. If we would ever get an inkling of a thought that older people are not useful to the kingdom, then we have forgotten our origin story. Where Abraham and Sarah are getting close to 100, and that is the time that God calls them to leave their home. That is the time that God gives them Isaac. That is the time that the promises that eventually end up being Jesus for us begin. Older people do have great faith. They can have great faith, and they're the ones that are going to be very useful to the kingdom. And I think as younger people, we need to recognize that. And even though we are working hard, and I think there's a lot of younger people working hard here, let's not forget how also the older people are working very hard. And to respect that, be very appreciative and thankful that we have older people in this congregation. Let's, before we go on to the other of that, the opposite, to see the way that the younger people should look at the older people should look at the younger people. Let's go to Job for just a second. Job sets the record straight about all this, and I think we need to clarify some things. We could go to 1 Kings 12, and we can just beat on the thought that, the Rehoboam's problem was he didn't listen to the older generation. And we've been in strange situations before where truth wasn't being taught, and a young person corrected an older person, and the older person didn't defend their thought with Scripture, but instead they just appealed to their experience to say that we all know that this is right. Job really sets the record straight on this. We use the title of this verse in Job 12:12. Job says, "Wisdom is with aged men, and the length of his days understanding. With him are wisdom and strength. He has counsel and understanding." I think that's a true thought, and alone it's a true statement. Generally, the longer you've lived, the more understanding and the more wisdom that you have. That makes sense. That's logical. If we took the time to read all of Job 12, which we're not, you'll find out that Job is actually being very sarcastic right here. And the reason is because his three friends, his miserable comforters, have come and given him some pretty awful advice. And what Job is telling them, isn't older men supposed to be wise? Because y'all are just a whole bunch of fools, right? This doesn't make sense. And he's fussing at his friends, saying what he should have expected, but instead of what he got. Well, as the friends and Job begin to have this conversation about God's justice, they basically come to the conclusion that God is evil. And they come to the conclusion that God is unfair. And that's when Elihu, the youngest, the fourth friend that we don't read about to the very end, decides to speak up. You need to turn there. I don't have this on the screen. Job 32. Elihu gets upset because they decided to justify Job rather than justify God. And this is how Elihu answers. Verse 4 gives Elihu's thought process. It says, "Now because there were years older than he, Elihu had waited to speak to Job. When Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of these three men, his wrath was aroused. So Elihu, the son of Barachel the Buzite, answered and said, 'I am young in years, and you are very old. Therefore I was afraid, and dared not declare my opinion to you. I said, age should speak, and the multitude of years should teach wisdom. But there is a spirit in man, and the breath of the Almighty gives him understanding. Great men are not always wise, nor do the aged always understand justice.'" Elihu's making the biblical point that experience does not always guarantee truth. And I think even in our own lifetime, we probably already recognize that. That just because someone's older and has an opinion doesn't necessarily mean that that opinion is truth, that that opinion is right. Just to give a very simple example, the Tuesday night study, we were at the Civic Center, and someone asked the question about smoking. As Christians, are we allowed to smoke? And we talked about that. We talked about addiction. We talked about idolatry. We talked about purposely hurting our bodies. We talked about all those things. And I remember Brother Clayton was there, and I asked Brother Clayton, 50 years ago, would we have even had that conversation? Brother Clayton was like, ah. And I said, right, because 50 years ago, we would all gone out and we would all taken a smoke break after this, right? Because you think about that, even from the situation, we're in a society situation where we know better than that. We know what smoking does to you. We know it takes years off your life. We understand addiction. We understand those things now. Was the older generation right to be all in that? Of course not. And so there was a situation right there where the younger generation that really tried to put a stop to the rampant tobacco use in America were in the right, weren't they? Are the old always truthful and always wise? No. There's times when truth can side with the young because truth is truth, regardless of whose mouth it's coming out of. Right? We understand that. Let me tell you something a little bit more personal to the kingdom work. You think about maybe in the 90s or in the 80s, where the Lord's Supper was often carried by deacons to nursing homes for individuals to take the Lord's Supper there by themselves on the Lord's Day. And a lot of churches practice that. Was that right? Read chapter 11. A big part of the Lord's Supper is that we're supposed to come together as a church. And that part was cut out so we could carry the Lord's Supper to people in nursing homes for them to take it as individuals all by themselves and not together. And what happened in the 80s and 90s? There was a younger generation that said, I know we've been doing this for decades, but this isn't truth, right? And there's times there where truth is truth regardless of whose mouth it's coming out of. And the older and the younger, we both need to understand that. That if we have a scriptural argument for something, that's when we have truth. But when we're using our experience just to state opinions, those are still just opinions and certainly don't conquer truth. Being that we understand this, I think it makes sense why Paul gives Timothy this saying in 5:1. He says, do not rebuke an older man, but exhort him as a father, younger men as brothers. It is difficult for an older man to hear a younger man's correction. I don't have this experience too much, but when a middle school kid comes and corrects me about something I said in Bible class, my first thought is, all right, listen here, little squirt. That's my first thought. And I go, wait, I need to listen, because they might be right. There might be truth in that, right? And I can make corrections. But he's giving advice to a younger man. He says, look, this is the way you should handle it. Don't let it be this hard rebuke. Let it be this loving correction to a father, an exhortation, right? When these things come up where the younger generation finds something that needs to be corrected in our kingdom work, cannot the younger people handle it like this? We are so thankful that the older generation has taught us and raised us in such a way that we lived in peace times while you fought battles, and now we found a weakness that we would like to correct. Is that not really a reward for the older people? And really a validation of the fathers to say, hey, look, we raised these people. And look, the way we've taught them, instructed them, and given them such a zeal and example, now they're going on and they're taking it even further closer towards God. And that's, I think, the exhortation. That, hey, the only reason why we're able to even have these conversations and see these things where we need to make corrections is because you taught us. You taught us how to study God's Word. And you taught us how to make application. And that way, I think that's when we can all work together and see clearly through any kind of prejudice and simply seek the truth, which I know in our deepest hearts of hearts, that's all we want to do. Let's close this up with how I would like for older people to perceive the younger. We're going to use the same verses that we've already used, but to make the reverse application. And again, as a younger person, this is how I would like the older people to perceive me. I want the older to know that you cannot look at the younger as just a problem. We're not a problem. We're all you got. This is your only option, right? And either you make it with us or you break it with us. There's not going to be another option later on. We're the only younger generation that you have. We can't just be a simple problem. What I want you to do is I want you to know that we do want your friendship. We treasure your friendship. Psalm 92, if you remember, it says, those that are planted in the house of God, they shall bear fruit in old age. They shall be fresh and flourishing. Having friendships, especially with older people, is fresh and flourishing. Because if you think about it, just from a logical perspective, these are the people that have mastered friendship and compassion and kindness. They're at the peak of their morality in this life. And you get to be a part of that. You get to be friends with that. And again, I know this isn't a broad statement that applies to everyone, but I think for most of us, do you not admire or miss your grandparents? I think about my granddads every day. I've lost them both, just in the past couple of years. And I knew my granddads when they were young. I knew they drank and they smoked and they cursed. I know they did all those things. But by the time I was born, they had purged all those things a long time ago. And I only got to see them and know them at their best. And they were my best friends. And I think that after I've lost them, you know what all I ever do now? I'm going and I'm looking for new grandfathers. To know people only at their best when they're at the height of bearing their fruit, when they're at their height of being fresh and flourishing. When to see them and get to know them at their best. And it saddens to me when older people come up to me and say, hey, I hate to bother you. I know I'm annoying you. No, you are not annoying me. You are not bothering me. You know, I treasure a friendship with you, and I think all young people are like that. They do want to have friends with much older people than them. We want you to tell us your stories. You're not going to annoy me with your stories. I want to hear your stories. You think about the most important story that was told in the Song of Moses, to ask your fathers and elders about the Exodus, and let them come and tell you about that. Those older stories are precious, and they're important. Never have I gone and visited an older person, and I got them talking to me about their life and what they did when they turned 20 and how they met their spouse and tell all these neat stories like this. Never have I once been like, man, I wish they would have stopped when I left. Man, I wish they wouldn't have gone down memory lane like that. No one does that. Actually, what we do is we go over there and we try to get you going and telling us about your stories. Because that's the way, again, that God designed it to be, didn't it? One last thing. We want you to be part of our lives. That's important to us. And that's the way I want the younger, I want the older to perceive the younger, that we do want you to be part of our lives. Let me take you back to the ENT just one more time. I promised I would not say their names. They know I'm about to tell this story. But there were two sisters here from Gardendale that were one day there at the ENT to get their ears worked on, you know. And I go in there to get my allergy shot, and I see them both, and I immediately go sit with them, right? And we're talking and we're cutting up. And as we're cutting up and we're talking, the one sister from Gardendale that drove the other sister there to get her ears checked, she was filling out that tablet for her, right? And as we're sitting there in the corner, she asked the other sister, do you have a history of hearing loss? The other sister says, what? Do you have a history of hearing loss? What? I'm on the floor. You know, and finally the other sister just says, I'm putting yes. And this was going on. We were having a great time. We were laughing and we were cutting up about this. And I go back into the back. I finally get called back to get my shot. She puts the needle on my arm. You know, they don't care anything about you, and they just like, whoosh. And she says, that was so sweet of you to sit with those ladies. And I was like, well, they go to church with me. She was like, but it was just so kind of you to go and sit. And I was like, we were having a fun time. And she just kept on and on, just, you know, trying to puff me up about, you know, how great it was for me to go and choose to sit by those ladies. And something dawned on me. The world does not have friendships in different generations. How could they? You know, of course they would have friendships within their family unit. But they are not in any other situation in life where they have the opportunity to make friendships with people that are from a different generation. What awful thing to miss out on that, right? I can't imagine going my life and not having friendships with people that are in their 90s and 80s and 70s. I can't imagine, Lord willing, if I make it to 70 and 80 or 90, that I wouldn't have friendships with people that were their teenagers in their 20s and their 30s. This is actually something that only the kingdom offers. This is one of these glimpses of glory that the Lord has shown us the way is to come. We want you to be a part of our lives. Why? Because the Bible commands it. That's why we want you to be part of our lives. I thought this would be just a good reminder for all of us, and something important certainly we could work on throughout the week, especially if you need to go to the doctor's office. Thank you so much for your attention, of course. If there's anyone here that is yet to be part of the kingdom, we would love to talk to you about that and encourage you to do that. When you're able to enter the church, the universal church, the kingdom through the blood of Jesus Christ, Through baptism and the washing away of your sins, you get to join a family and a community that's generations are never ending. That not only that you won't just be family with some of our older brethren here, but even family with people like Abraham and Sarah, those who've also been saved by Jesus through faith. If there's any way we could assist you with that, please come forward as we stand and sing.